Tampa?
Yeah.
Sitting his daughter?
No, he's at some beach.
Sounds
Well, Tom being Tom, right? He has to make sure he stays entertained while he's at the beach. He's brought Rivercliff's financials because he would prefer to go over those than sit on the beach. But that's why we love him, right?
Right.
We'll wait another minute or two and then we'll get into it. I don't have my notes with me. That's going to make things difficult.
Might want to get those.
Yeah.
See how much I know from memory. I mean, quite frankly, I may as well not have them half the time for how often I reference them. Yeah, one of those folding.
So what?
One of those folding things.
Oh, yeah.
Do you like it or?
Well, the jury's out. This is actually a replacement. This is the next generation. I bought one, and after about a year, it will work as long as you don't ever fold it. Like it locks up when you fold it and unfold it.
Yeah, so that's the kind of thing I would worry about.
And so, but I was desperate because it wasn't working. I use it as a backup phone now. I never fold it, and it works fine.
There you go.
But this one is working. Like that one was a Galaxy 6. This is a Galaxy 7. I like it. I just hope this one doesn't stop working in a year. That's the whole thing.
There's a guy, I see his videos every once in a while. He basically gets every new device and then he tries to annihilate it. Let me tell you, he does.
Wow.
He regularly has to throw the phone because all of a sudden it's about to explode on him. That's usually during his break test as he actively tries to snap it in half. And every one of those, he gets sand. He gets it halfway and he puts it in the fold. And of course he does this right at the beginning, so for the rest of this thing, it's it's awful. So he's like, when they say dust free, apparently not, right? But no, I mean, he also doesn't have cases on everything. I think that probably would affect it. Anyway, I don't know. I think they're cool, but I'm too scared to get something like that. So, especially the ones that go 3 now.
Well, the reason, what attracted me to it is I carry my phone in my pocket.
Mm-hmm.
And by folding, it's a smaller profile in your pocket, but you can open it up and you've still got a screen.
I remember it was right after the original Razor, which was the cool phone when I was in high school.
Were cool, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And around that time, the trend was how small could you get the phone?
Oh, yeah.
And there was one phone, I remember, it was about that big, folded in half, and you could unfold it. And I knew a couple people who had it. I'm like, that's too much. And then I think it was the iPad came out. And then the trend was, let's get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Well, that's kind of like the one, they make one that folds laterally.
Right, yeah. It becomes a tablet.
Yeah, it becomes basically a tablet,
Anyway, I don't know. That's too much technology for me, I guess. Well, I guess like I said, the 3 of us or the 3 of you and the 1 of me, we'll dive in here. So last week we covered kind of the introduction to Haggai, and then Haggai chapter 1. Although we kind of sped through it, especially the latter portion. So I don't know if have any questions come up with Haggai? Yeah, go ahead.
This is technology question. So last week, did the Bible study record correctly last week? I went back to watch it again, And when I try to watch it on YouTube, it just gives the tail end of the Lord's Prayer. I mean, it's like just the very
Oh my
end.
goodness.
That's all it. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong or if
Huh.
something, but all it does, like
I know
it.
it's streamed. I know it's streamed because my parents watched it.
Oh, so the whole thing's. Oh, but you don't know how much they recorded.
Yeah, I mean, it should stay up there. So I don't know. I'll have to look into that.
So yeah, see if when you bring it up, if it just gives like the last couple of words of the Lord's Prayer.
Yeah, because that would. Well, I got 2 people watching right now,
Okay.
so hopefully it'll work after. I'll look into that and kind of see. Because sometimes we gotta like check the right boxes to make stuff public, or whatever. But it's weird that it would only be a small portion.
Yeah,
That's
just all it shows me is the tail end. I mean, how many times the product.
I mean, we're behind on posting recordings, but all the classes are recorded. So John should be going up soon. Like I said, we got behind, other things were going on, that kind of stuff. But John should be going up soon, and then right after Haggai and Malachi will be coming out. Speaking of, while we're doing kind of housekeeping sort of stuff, next week we will not meet because I'm on vacation. So we're going to finish Haggai. We're going to take a 1-week break, let it marinate, and then we're going to come back and do Malachi in the 3 weeks leading up to Lent, which I can't remember. So Malachi is one of those books. Yeah, so in our Bibles, Malachi is 4 chapters. In Hebrew Bibles, it's 3. We've run into this kind of thing happening in the past. I mean, I know Joel did it. I think not Malachi. Yes, Malachi, but not. I think the Micah series did it a little bit too. It's just, the simple version is the Masoretic scribes, which describes about the time of Jesus, a little bit after. They're the ones that basically give us the form of the Old Testament that we have today as it's laid out. Or like the layout of it, and some of the kind of transcriptions. They're also, gratefully for every seminarian, they're the ones who put the vowels in the Old Testament, because originally there were none. Because Hebrew didn't use vowels. They hadn't been like added to their written alphabet. I mean, they would say them, but they didn't write them down. It's kind of a weird thing that really old languages do sometimes. So they added vowels. They also set up their own chapter and verse system. It actually includes verse and quarter, or half verse and quarter verse as well, in the Masoretic system. That doesn't transfer over at all. When the English was, or I think it's probably the Vulgate, or maybe even the Greek. I'm not sure when exactly it happened. But as it's being divided up, the one we have, they're just using a different tradition that doesn't come from the Masoretes. It's probably based on the Septuagint, if I have to venture a guess. But that's why every once in a while, and you would never know it unless I told you, right? Every once in a while, the chapters in the Old Testament don't line up. So that's how I'm getting 3 weeks out of a 4-chapter book. We're going to do it. We're going to do Malachi by the Hebrew division for the high holy reason of I'll have 3 weeks in between getting back from vacation and Lent. So guess what? We're using their chapter division. That wasn't the original plan, but I scheduled my vacation after I scheduled the class. So there we go. So next week, no class. The following week, we'll get back going with Malachi. Good. That was kind of a housekeeping question. Still good. But any questions from the text, or I guess any other questions? All right. So in the beginning, the opening chapter of Haggai, we saw as the people had returned from exile, at least most of them had, right? And we talked a little about how the return from exile is not just one event. It takes place over a long period of time in many different ways, but that's more of an issue for Ezra and Nehemiah. So the remnant has come back for all intents and purposes of the book, but there's a problem. What's the problem?
They started work on the temple and stopped.
Right, so they put up an altar, and then they were done, right? And we looked that there's probably both historical, like political, and religious theological reasons why that happened. It wasn't just that they flat out ignored it, but there were some reasons why they didn't build the temple. Yet, no matter, God speaks for the first time post-exile or not post-exile, post-return from exile. God speaks to his people through a prophet. That being here, the prophet Haggai. And remember, what does he say?
Finish the temple.
I mean, the shortest version is finish the temple, almost in a little inverse of David's conversation about the temple, right? It's like, well, hey, you guys have nice houses, paneled houses, whatever exactly that means, and yet my temple is desolate. Therefore, you have become desolate, right? These hard times or whatever that you're on, that's why it's happened. And we're going to kind of touch on that a little bit again today. It comes back up in chapter 2. And so after that, work resumes on the temple. They get right to it, right? We said, so it takes them about a week or two. They had to, file permits and get the red tape cut and, make sure their zoning was okay. But they basically immediately get to work on the temple. Then we have if I remember rightly, somewhere there's a 2-month gap. It's not yet, it's partway through chapter 2. Then there's another short gap, and in chapter 2, we see another oracle, and that God comes to Haggai again by his hand to give his word to his people. Before we keep going, though, let's remember some of the structural components of Haggai. One is that the dating has been happening in relation to King Darius, right? The Persian king, new dynasty, all that kind of fun stuff. And now this is, by the way, it's the Achaemenid dynasty, if you're really wanting to impress your friends, which is different than Cyrus, and I can never remember the name of his. It was real short, it's basically just him. But the Achaemenid dynasty of the Persian Empire, and that's how the book is dated. Yet, as we go, Darius slowly starts to kind of fade out of the book, and we're going to be seeing that through the second chapter, right? Because it's the end of the book. And then apart from Darius, we have 3 other named individuals in the book. Remember who they are?
Joshua.
Zerubbabel, Joshua, and that's part of the name, right? So that was Joshua, son of Jehozadak, and then Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel.
Yeah.
So they're named, but that's this guy's name. One guy just tells you who his dad is, right? So now, who's the third named individual in the prophet Haggai? You're going to kick yourself when you figure it out. And we're not counting Darius. Haggai! Haggai! And these 3 together, right, represent that threefold office, right? Prophet, priest, and king, but not the king, right? Prophet, priest, and earthly ruler or governor, but decidedly not the king, right? And so there we do see a pretty stark contrast to, or almost a lack that is within this office, right? So people have been restored, the remnant has returned, but they're still kind of missing something. And of course, this also brings to mind the proper place of the kings of Israel, northern and southern kingdom, which really isn't king, it's more prince, right? Because who is the king of Israel? It's God, right? That's always been the point. This is what Samuel gets all bent out of shape about when the people start asking for a king, right? And he says, well, no, right? And he gets really mad about this whole thing. And God says, Samuel, it's not you they've rejected, it's me. And we're going to give them a king. They're not going to like it. It's going to be bad for them, but we're going to give them a king, right? And then we have, who's the first king? Saul, right? Not David, right? David comes later. So I guess you have two dynasties of the early combined kingdom. The first one being Saul's dynasty, which doesn't last past him, and then you have David's. Although I guess there is a king appointed who is one of the sons of Saul. It's just that he gets anointed into a civil war immediately as David takes control. And then, of course, the north is a gigantic mess. They got shifting dynasties of kings all over the place. But we're seeing those little reminders, right? That governing office was a pretty serious problem. But yet, we have some continuity there, right? And so, beginning with chapter 2, we get to see as this, as God speaks once again to his people, right? As the work on the temple has already begun. So, can I have a volunteer to read chapter 2, verses 1 through 9?
I'll read it.
Thank you, sir.
In the 7th month, on the 21st day of the month, the word of the Lord came by the hand of Haggai the prophet. Speak now to Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and to all the remnant of the people, and say, who is left among you who saw this house in its former glory? How do you see it now? Is it not as nothing in your eyes? Yet now be strong, O Zerubbabel, declares the Lord. Be strong, O Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest. Be strong, all you people of the land, declares the Lord. For I am with you, declares the Lord of hosts, according to the covenant that I made with you when you came out of Egypt. My spirit remains in your midst. Fear not, for thus says the Lord of hosts. Yet once more, in a little while, I will shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land. And I will shake all nations, so that the treasures of all nations shall come in. And I will fill this house with glory, says the Lord of hosts. The silver is mine, and the gold is mine, declares the Lord of hosts. The latter glory of this house shall be greater than the former, says the Lord of hosts. And in this place I will give peace, declares the Lord of hosts.
All right, quick reminder, since it came up a lot in this section, is that phrase Lord of hosts is that, well, in Hebrew it's Yahweh Sabaoth, that Sabbath, or Sabaoth, is not Sabbath, Sabaoth, which means like the God of armies, the guard. We're talking like the hosts or the heavenly hosts, right? And so God is using some pretty strong language as he kind of declares himself here in this section. He uses that phrase for himself, the Lord of hosts, the Lord of hosts, the Lord of hosts, right? Yahweh Sabaoth, or Yahweh Sabaoth. And so we can kind of keep that in mind as we go. So in this section, we see kind of a once and future sort of paradigm here, right? Haggai, or Yahweh through Haggai, God through the prophet speaks to the governor and the priest in this particular case, and all the people, right? We shouldn't forget that the people are included in this. And first directs them to the past, right? How many of you remember the former glory, right? And then he also directs them to the present. Says, right, is it not as nothing in your eyes, before going to the future? So we kind of noted that Haggai shifts from kind of a very heavily located in time towards more eschatological themes, where God is speaking not just to the people of his day, which he is, but he's speaking to all people of all time as well. And so in this case, we get it with centering on the temple, right? How many of you remember the temple? What does it look like now? Here's what I'm going to do with it, sort of thing, right? And then just as a reminder, Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, is listed in 2 Chronicles as one who was taken into exile. So we know for a fact, at least him, and likely Zerubbabel as well, saw the temple, the first temple, the original temple. Though one of the things that I think is worth kind of pausing here is, what state was the temple in by the time the Babylonians came through?
Was it in bad shape?
I wasn't, yeah, I kind of gleaned it from the question, right? I know you guys are kind of out of the Samuel Chronicles section of the read through the Bible, not Samuel, the Kings and Chronicles. But what you see, especially in Chronicles, is, especially in Chronicles, because Chronicles seems to have been written by the priest of Judah, whereas Kings seems to be written by the court scribes, or that's our best guess. You see, especially in Chronicles, that what happens to the temple is that it's over a vast amount of time, it's neglected, it's ignored, and it goes into disrepair, right? So sometimes, honestly, it's not a bad thing. At one point, I forget who exactly was the king, but an Asherah pole is erected within the temple of the Lord. I know, right? It's bad. And this is before Hezekiah, if I remember rightly. And one of the kings, again, before Hezekiah, he's listed as one of the good kings. He rips it out. And he kind of does so with such fervor that he damages the building in the process. And that stays damaged for a while. You have in Chronicles comment a couple of times about kind of capital campaigns, to use our terminology, right? Special chests, basically, that they had in the entrance of the temple, or the way the people would come in, right? Obviously, they were going into the temple, they were in the courts, right? Where you would deposit money for the purposes of refurbishing and keeping up the temple. And there's all sorts of comments about this. There's a long period of time where it just never gets opened, the money chest, which means that they're not doing any renovations on the temple because they don't need to pay anyone to do those, right? There's a couple of times where it says, and they opened it to pay the workers, right? And I believe it also gets raided at least once to pay off an enemy king, right? As a bribe, which is, if you guys remember from the Men's Bible Breakfast, is like one of the hallmarks of what makes you a bad king, is trusting, is paying other people off and not just trusting in God, right? But I mean, the worship at the temple had declined significantly. Josiah does a rebuilding project on the temple, and that's fairly close to the end of the Southern Kingdom. I think it's like his grandson or something that ends up getting ousted the first time. I don't know, it gets kind of messy there. But, I mean, the temple's not in the same glory it was with Solomon, right? Even when Judah and Zerubbabel would have seen it. I keep saying Judah, Joshua and Zerubbabel would have been looking at it, right? So how are we supposed to take this? This sense of, right, the former glory of the temple. How are we supposed to understand that? Or well, let's kind of add a little bit here. Right after that, Yahweh says, you know, and look at it now. What's the state of the temple when this is said?
Pretty beat up.
There's nothing left.
Oh, I was going to say, I mean, we got an altar and we got like a foundation. I mean, it's under construction now, but it's not done. There's no way it's done. Let's see. This is the 7th. It was burned.
Burned stone.
No, the one you're thinking of, where no two stones get kept on top of each other.
No, that's after Jesus.
I was going to say that happens after Jesus.
No, I thought the Babylonians burned it.
They probably did. Most of the temple was not stone, if I remember correctly. I mean, there was stone in the temple. A lot of it was built out of cedar and overlaid in gold.
I see.
But even then, I mean, you can burn. You don't burn the stones. You burn things inside of the stones. In fact, random, totally unrelated history thing. It's really fascinating. This is one of the ways you take down a wall. It's called sapping. It's extremely dangerous. It dates back to the Romans, although it was mostly done in the Middle Ages and early Renaissance. What you do is you dig a tunnel from your camp under the wall. And when you get under the wall, you light it on fire. You light the tunnel on fire. And then, due to a lot of things, the ground being unstable, you heating up the stones, they start to crack and gaps form as the mortar kind of expands and compresses. And you can knock a wall down this way. There's during the kind of Turkish conquest into Europe, you have a number of times that there are these great stories of sappers and counter sappers, right? Because if you're inside, you don't want this to happen, so you listen for pickaxes hitting rocks, and then you go get them. And so it was, like I said, it was extremely dangerous. Forget cave-ins, you also had to watch out for no matter which side you were on, the bad guys just appearing somewhere with swords. Well, anyway, really fascinating stuff. They would use fire to knock down stone structures. Same sort of thing. Let's say that the temple was made 100% out of stone. You light the stuff inside it on fire. The stones heat up, expand, contract. The mortar loses its integrity, and you can knock it down that way. It's a lot easier when you don't have wrecking balls and bulldozers to do stuff like that, as opposed to, hit it with really heavy stuff, right? Like you don't use a battering ram to knock down a wall. That's way too strong for that. You knock the gate down with the battering ram, right? But yeah, so the temple by the time the folks return it's at most rubble, right? And so the point the question was, what does the temple look like when they're told to look at the temple? Because it's not done, right? You would kind of get the sense, and in fact, there are plenty of commenters who are kind of higher critical that say that this section 1 through 9 is not in the right spot. Where does it belong, according to them? Where would you expect God to say something like this? You remember the former temple? Well, look at this temple. Is it not as nothing in your eyes? When would you expect God to say something like that? Well, it's under construction, or after it's done, right? Yeah. You would kind of expect this to be on the event of the dedication of the temple, maybe. And there are some people who say, well, clearly Haggai said this during the dedication. It makes the most sense for him to have said it during the dedication. But of course, that's kind of a higher critical thing. We don't like doing that. We would rather say, well, no, Haggai, God, put this where he did on purpose. And so why would God ask the people a question like this? Remember the old temple, is this one as nothing in your eyes when it was glorious, right? Why would he ask them that while it's still under construction?
Do you want to see more gold or something like that?
So this is a question, right? Because if you kind of look down, because we should understand this as one unit, right? Because in verse 10 we see the beginning of a new unit, right? And we know it not only because there's a heading there, which makes it easy, but because we have another on the 20. Okay, that's a new prophecy because we get a new dating formula, right? But if you look down at verse 8, the silver, well, actually even before that, so 7, I will shake all nations so that the treasures of all nations shall come in, and I will fill this house with glory, says, right, Yahweh Sabaoth. The silver is mine, the gold is mine, declares Yahweh Sabaoth. So one way that this has been taken is there's not enough gold and silver in here, right? It is literally, a shell of its former self. Solomon's temple, right, was plated in gold. It was, everything. The cost of that must have been enormous, right? The craftsmanship that went into it. It was fantastic, right? It's this incredible thing. And certainly that is not happening this time. They're not plating stuff in gold this time around. Why? They probably don't have the gold to do it, right? And so is God starting off this way saying, no, well, my temple used to be so glorious, right? and now it's not. And then he does point to the future glory of his temple, right? That's in this section. And then God says, right, silver is mine, the gold is mine, I'm going to fill my temple with glory, right? So is that how we want to take those last couple of verses? By the way, that is a way that many people have taken it, is that God will, when God shakes the nations, he will do so in such a way as to bring all of the wealth into this new temple. I have to say, I don't favor that interpretation here. In fact, I'm sticking with the early church, who tends to see those passages at the end, which I know is not what you're referencing there, Gary, as exactly the opposite of God saying, the silver is mine, the gold is mine, so what do I care? Right? I have no interest in that, which seems to me to fit more with the overall message that God has, right? Right? I don't care about your sacrifices. I'm the cow on 1,000 hills, right? I don't need those. In those other places where God says, right, like, he says, rend your blank, not your garments. What does he want you to rend? This is Joel, I think.
Your heart.
Rend your heart, not your garments, right? I have all the cattle on 1,000 hills. I'm not pleased with your sacrifice. But what sacrifice is pleasing to God? I don't have the citation, but it's a broken and contrite heart, right? Repentance, true worship, right? If we look forward to Jesus, right, they hand him a coin and say, who do we pay taxes to, right? Or no, they say, who do we pay taxes to? He says, give me a coin, right? And so, look at this. We have Jesus has the perfect opportunity to say, give me all your money, right? What does he say?
Render unto Caesar.
Give to Caesar what's Caesar's, meaning, in his context, right? Whose picture is this, right?
Caesar. Yeah.
Give him the money. Give him what you owe him. Render to God what is God's. What is Jesus talking about there?
Your heart.
Good. Because the answer is not, and I have heard this, the answer is not the stuff you put in the offering plate. That is not what Jesus is not doubling down on the tithe or anything like that. No. It's your heart. It's worshiping, to use some other stuff, it's worshiping in spirit and truth, right? So, what might the temptation be for the people who are rebuilding this temple, and they're putting the bricks or the wood or whatever it is in place, and they're going, man, I remember what the old temple looked like. What might the point be here? Right? So yes, the former temple was glorious. What made the former temple glorious in the eyes of the people?
But that's where God lived.
There's a little bit of that, but I would argue that for the vast majority of the kingdoms of Judah's history, they don't really care. They like that when they have a problem, and they need the God in their pocket sort of thing. But what made the temple glorious
It was beautiful.
is how richly ordained it is, right? And so I think we should read this as God saying, right? Because again, he says, who is left among you who saw this house in its former glory? How do you see it now? He's not saying I see it this way. He's saying, how do you see it now? Is it not as nothing in your eyes? These are all questions, right? And the idea is, yeah, that's probably what the people were thinking.
So basically, he's just trying to change their perspective.
I think so. I'll be honest, this is kind of a weird section. There's a few kind of weird sections where, because they go eschatological, we start losing, really firm interpretations, right? But let's remember, how is this followed up? Be strong, O Zerubbabel, declares the Lord. Be strong, O Joshua. Be strong, all you people. Work, for I am with you, declares the Lord of hosts, right? And then we'll get to verse 5 in a second here. God is encouraging them, not shaming them, right? This is an encouragement here. And then he says, right, work, I'm with you in this. Just like, right, verse 5, what does he bring their minds back to? According to the covenant I made with you when you came out of Egypt. My spirit remains in your midst. Fear not, right? Don't be worried that this isn't going to be as sparkly as the old one, I'm not, right? I'm not like the other gods. I don't care about that kind of thing, right? That's not, right? Where were the people of Egypt, or the people of Egypt? What were the Israelites that came out of Egypt? Where were they worshiping when God made the covenant with them? Well, yes, very specifically, they were worshiping the golden calf. Tabernacle's not around yet. Remember, Sinai is when God gives them instructions for the tabernacle. So where are they worshiping before that? Correct. They don't have... the closest you can get is Mount Sinai. And that is because we get that out of... I referenced it in my sermon very briefly last Sunday. When God gives the instructions to Moses, it's really weird. Go back and read the Exodus account. It's weird. Because God doesn't say, like, oh, I need to free my people. Or, no, I'm sorry. In the burning bush, God says, the proof. You remember what the proof will be that God's going with Moses to Egypt? You'll worship me on this mountain. It's like, well, okay, that's kind of a post-de facto proof, right? But the worship on the mountain. And then when Moses gets there, he doesn't actually ask for the freedom of the Israelites. That takes like multiple plagues. He says, let us go out in the wilderness and worship. He's just asking them, like, hey, let us go out in the wilderness. Might be Sinai, might not even be Sinai, right? Let's just worship God. And Pharaoh says no. And then it eventually gets to let my people go, right? It doesn't start that way. The Exodus account's, it's kind of weird how it works. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about. But God reminds the people of that covenant. The covenant he made when they weren't even, right? They were worshiping at Sinai, but they were also worshiping a golden calf as God made this covenant with them, as he cut the covenant, as it were. And yet God still made that covenant with them and kept that covenant with them. And so I think part of this is, one, reminding the people who he is, right? Especially as they have kind of witnessed their own exodus, right? They were prisoners, refugees, well, not even refugees, right? Not quite slaves in the same sense, but right? They were relocated to foreign lands. They were not allowed to leave. They were captives. That's what I was looking for. And God has just brought them out. Now, not quite as dramatically as with 10 plagues and the sea splitting in half, but just as in the eyes of the prophets, it's just as glorious that God brings back his remnant. So he's encouraging them. And then he goes into this, right? The only verse in Haggai that is definitely referenced in the New Testament. I think there's a few others that might be being referenced, but they're not quoted, if you will. And that is, right, it's also referenced in Handel's Messiah, right? For thus says the Lord of hosts, yet once more in a little while I will shake the heavens and the earth, the sea and the dry land, and I will shake all nations, so that the treasures of all nations shall come in, and I will fill this house with glory, says the Lord of hosts. The silver is mine, the gold is mine, declares the Lord of hosts. The latter glory of this house shall be greater than the former, says the Lord of hosts. And in this place I will give peace, declares the Lord of hosts. So God takes the people out of the present and points them to the future. So, what's going on? We have a true future prophecy. I'll shake the heavens and the earth. What's he talking about? Right. Heavens and the earth, sea, dry land, all nations, I'll shake. And then there's lots of notes that go all over the place. I love Handel's Messiah. But so what's going on? What is God talking about here?
Is he talking end times?
Maybe. So here's one of those just great places. We have three kind of major options for what is being talked about here. One of them is this, if you will, cosmic level shaking. And maybe end times, maybe not quite. Day of the Lord language, though, for sure. Right? And that great and terrible day of the Lord, right? The prophets are talking about. I mean, it's definitely kind of keying into, we talked a little bit about the day of the Lord This is keying into that thought, right? This is the day that God does his redeeming, his judging, his rescuing, his bringing the remnant in, all that kind of stuff. And so there's definitely some end times, quote unquote, day of the Lord imagery going on here. So that's one category. Another one is that this happens in a historical context. Kind of like I was in the class, so I know Pastor Jordan talked a little bit about some of Daniel's visions, especially the statue, and how most historians and, good biblical theologians kind of identify the different bits of the statue with certain actual kingdoms in history. And by the way, the big difference between those two groups is not what it is referencing, but when Daniel wrote it. The more text critical secular scholars will say, well, yeah, but Daniel wrote it after it all happened, whereas the kind of more faithful interpreters will say, well, no, he wrote it before it all happened, because that's what he's doing. But right, when we kind of look at, Alexander the Great, the Diadochoi, those Greek rulers, right, with the Seleucids, and then Rome, and there's some variation in there, but that's basically, most people agree that's what that's talking about. There's a lot of people that think that's what's going on here. And so there's some sense that, well, maybe this was Darius, although that one's really unlikely because that's already happened, right? Maybe this is Alexander the Great again being referenced in here. And Alexander shook a lot of the earth from a metaphorical standpoint. Some say it's the Romans, or again, any sort of historical group. So that's another option, is that this is kind of a political shaking, and the political aspect of it comes more than like an earthquake, if you will. That does kind of come up too, because of the numerous references to nations, right, being shaken. The last is that this has Christological import. Right, that this is, and there's a couple of different ways to run this. One is that shaking the heavens and the earth takes place at the incarnation, where God enters into the world. That, I think, seems to be how Handel kind of takes it in the Messiah. The other one, which I think is probably better, is that this shaking is more in reference to the work of Christ, the life, the death, and the resurrection. And quite frankly, when Jesus died, what happened? There was an earthquake, so we even get some literal shaking. And then, of course, what happens after the resurrection is kind of the whole world starts to shake with the impact of the gospel and the Spirit going out. So, which one is it?
I like the last one.
I like the last one, too.
I like the last one.
I think it's probably all three. I think this is one of those places, kind of like we did a lot with Revelation, right? Now, this is not apocalyptic literature, right? But it is kind of dealing with some similar themes. It's eschatological, right? Eschatology, by the way, is the study of the end kind of thing. Which Revelation, actually, in many ways, has less of that than Haggai does in some senses. But, and in that eschatological sense, we also have a lot of this Day of the Lord. And the Day of the Lord vibe, if you do remember back from Joel when we kind of talked about it, the Day of the Lord can mean anything from, God destroying a nation, like he does with the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, to the life, death, resurrection of Jesus, to the final judgment, and kind of a lot of stuff in between. And it's best understood not as a either or, but as a both and. I think if you really want to drop one, probably the historical one's the one to drop. But I don't have any good reason, right? I do agree. The commenter makes the point of saying maybe it's not really that worth our time to try and identify what happened. Also, this does come back up later in the book, which does throw a little bit of a wrench into things. We'll kind of deal with it, that this will happen during the lifetime of Zerubbabel. So that's right at the end. We'll kind of sort out what's going on in those last couple of verses, because the ending of the book is a little weird, maybe unexpected. The book shifts its focus, but we'll get there. So I think trying to kind of pull this whole section together, right? Who remembers the former glory? Certainly the glory in your eyes, right? Who sees how little of a thing it is now, but look at this glory I'm going to bring to it, right? And if we're going to assume that verse 8, the silver is mine and the gold is mine, means I don't care about that, then what is the treasures of all nations? What is that in reference to? Because if we're going to say that the silver and the gold is worthless in God's eyes, then the verse up in verse 7, the treasures there cannot refer to silver and gold. Because in that verse, it is, right? I'll shake all nations, the treasures of the nations shall come in, and I will fill this house with glory. So you have two options. One is that the glory and the treasure of the nations is silver and gold, and verse 8 means God is basically saying, it's mine and I'm going to take it, right? We've already kind of said we don't really like that. So what do we do with verse 7? How do we manage the treasures of the nation that will come into the temple and will fill the temple with glory? Especially if he's, right, doing this in the midst of this eschatological, cosmic, Christological shaking. What might the treasures of the nations be?
Their faith and belief.
Bingo, right? We've already kind of hit it, right? What made the old temple, what makes any temple glorious, right? It's not the gilding, or any temple that the Lord dwells in, right? It's not the gilding or the artistry. It's the broken and contrite heart. It's the faith and the looking to God, all of that kind of stuff. It's the treasures of the nations then are, to really put a pin on it, is these are the souls of people. And what do we see happen in the New Testament? In the last days, after God has shaken the world in Christ, what do we see happen? In the context of all nations.
Gospel is spread.
The gospel goes out and people of all nations come to faith, right? We see this beginning in Acts, right? And the Pentecost event. But we also see it in the book of Revelation in that kind of apocalyptic way when John says, I see people of all tribes and nations. I think that's connected, that those ideas are connected here, is that God will go out, and by the way, this hits a ton of the, especially minor prophets, that talk about the return and God gathering his people, and it always includes Gentiles, which often feels kind of out of place. You're like, hold on, you've just been talking about the Israelites, and all of a sudden Gentiles are popping up? Or you've just been really mad at the Gentiles, and all of a sudden you're gathering them to you too? I think it's a similar thing going on here, where the treasures of the nations are its people. The people that God cares for, the people that the gospel goes out to, and they bring them back to the temple, right? Is it a literal temple? No. It's the temple of, I guess, to put a fine point on it, the church, right? And that's the church in the sense of, Haggai is a part of the church too, right? The people of God of all time and all places, right? I think that's what's going on here. Good. Questions while I find the thing that I know I wanted to tell you? Okay, yes. This kind of style is pretty par for the course for God, right? In fact, it was very long, so that's why I'm not quoting it. But the author kind of riffs on this idea with other biblical stories. And he kind of says, look at Noah. Was he not nothing in your eyes? And yet God valued him and saved the world through him, right? Look at David. Was he not nothing in your eyes? And yet I made him the king after my own heart, right? Look at, and here's where, right, the real kicker comes, right? Look at the cross. Is that not a stumbling block for all of you? And yet it's my glory on full display, right? So I think this again, kind of rendering this 1 through 9 in this sort of a sense with this understanding of, God doesn't look at glory the same way we do. The treasure of nations is the souls of man, and that God will take active and involved dramatic steps to bring those treasures to him. I think that fits not only within the framework of Haggai, but it fits in the framework of the larger scriptural narrative. Right? Cool. Questions on 1 through 9? This is my second time asking, and we don't do 3 strikes here. So. Danny, so you got one?
No, I'm just thinking that language, be strong, reminds me of Joshua.
Oh, yeah, I mean,
The first.
be strong and courageous. Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, bind up the weak knees. I mean, kind of that God encouraging his people to have strength. Again, that is, because he's with you, all of that. That is, again, it fits also in that kind of stream of the biblical narrative, right? I mean, especially that God with us. I mean, that's Emmanuel, right? And again, what's the book of Haggai really about? Oh, come on. You guys know this. What's the book of Leviticus about?
It's all about Christ.
There you go. This is the whole thing's about Jesus, right? The Haggai's about, it's pointing us towards Christ, right? The first chapter is kind of hard to see that, but I think as we move into the second chapter, we can Jesus starts kind of poking out in different places. All right. One of you two brave enough to handle 10 through 19. It's a long section.
I'll try it. I don't have my glasses.
When you get to any names, just go for it. None of us can pronounce any of them very well. So,
Okay, so we're going 10 through
10 to 19.
On the 24th day of the 9th month in the 2nd year of Darius, the word of the Lord came by Haggai the prophet. Thus says the Lord of hosts, ask the priest about the law. If someone carries holy meat in the fold of his garment and touches with his fold bread or stew or wine or oil of any kind of food, does it become holy? The priest answered and said, no. Then Haggai said, if someone who is unclean by contact with a dead body touches any of these, does it become unclean? The priest answered and said, it does become unclean. Then Haggai answered and said, so is it with the people and with this nation before me, declares the Lord, and so with every work of their hands, and what they offer there is unclean. You then consider from this day onward, before some was placed upon stone in the temple of the Lord, how did you fare? When one came to a heap of 20 measures, there were but 10. When one came to the wine vat to draw 50 measures, there were but 20. I struck you in all the products of your toil with blight and with mildew and with hail, yet you did not turn to me, declares the Lord. Consider from this day onward, from the 24th day of the 9th month, since the day that the foundation of the Lord's temple was laid, consider, is the seed yet in the barn? Indeed, the vine, the fig tree, the pomegranate, and the olive tree have yielded nothing. But from this day on, I will bless you.
All right. This is, in my mind, the weirdest and most confusing part of the book. I'll be honest. I've been, not a New Year's resolution, but kind of. I've been trying to make prayer a more active part of my day. And so every morning when I get in, I start with the Bible, and then I spend some time in prayer. And I've decided, at least for now, I was like, well, I'm teaching Haggai, so I may as well read it. So kind of every day I've been in the office since I came back, I've read the book of Haggai. It's 2 chapters, right? So go me. And I have read this section so many times, and it's weird. and kind of trying to figure out what God is trying, even understanding his metaphor is hard, I think. And I think part of that is because I'm removed from the system and the culture that this is being written in, right? This is written to people who aren't me, who are living in this kind of clean and unclean sort of system. So I'm going to try and help you guys out because I read the commentary and I think I got it figured out. I didn't figure it out. I read a guy who's smarter than me who figured it out. It only took him 70 pages to sort it out. He is not brief. Anyway, so first of all, before we even get to that, nope, Darius has been demoted, right? In the second year of Darius. Not Darius the king. There's no, and then we'll note that that's the last time Darius's name shows up. That's it. We're done. So that's a little thing there. All right. So let's first consider the metaphor, or not even the metaphor, the seminary question that Haggai asks, right? So the first one is, and by the way, this kind of, especially as a New Testament person, they get both of them right, which kind of feels like, I don't know, it's counter to my expectations of the Pharisees screwing every answer that Jesus gives them up, but they nail it, right? Haggai doesn't say, well, no, you fools, you've misunderstood this completely. He says, yeah, okay, good, you understand. So the first example that is given, the first question is, if someone takes holy meat in the fold of their robe and touches other food with the fold of the robe, does it become holy? Does the food become holy? So the answer is no, right? So what in the world does any of this mean, right? What is holy meat? Do you guys know? Good, because I mean, I probably could have worked my way to something of an answer, but what this is this is meat that has been part of a sacrifice to God.
So would it be the same thing as being kosher?
No. So everything else is kosher, right?
Okay. Okay.
So it's also worth noting, we kind of have three tiers going on. We have the holy, we have the unclean, and then there's what you might call the mundane. There's just the stuff that just is, right? It's not unclean, but it's not holy either. And really what these two questions do is they ask about what makes what holy and what makes something holy and what makes something unclean. Because they're interacting with, in this case, food, in that middle tier, right? So the meat here is meat that is part of a sacrifice. The very, very short version without reading Leviticus, which is about Jesus, but it's also about a lot of religious laws and procedures as well. So the short version of this is when animals are sacrificed to God, most of the time, you don't burn the whole thing. Right? This actually goes for most most sacrificial cultural systems, right? I think it's Prometheus in Greek mythology that tricks the gods into asking for all the guts so that the people can still eat the meat. That's one of the reasons why they don't like Prometheus. I think someone does trick the gods into thinking the intestines are the good part. Right? But in this sense, right, God kind of does the same thing. Right? The part that is set aside to be burned is certain parts of fat, certain organs, and things like that. And this isn't Leviticus, so don't ask me why. But what happened with the meat?
It got eaten.
By who?
Priests.
This is how the priests got fed. And there's the one I remember from when I was in high school and I read through the Bible for the first time. I have no idea what the context of it is, but there's this special fork that the priests would get, and they'd be boiling something, and they stab it in, and whatever came out, that was their dinner, right? I'm sure it's more detailed. That's a memory from a long time ago, but that's what we're talking about here. This is meat that has been set aside. It's sacrificial in nature. It is meant for human consumption, but it has been involved in a sacrifice, and therefore it has been made holy, right? It's not just anything. This is kind of like the Passover lamb, right? You ate the whole Passover lamb because it was a holy thing. And what did you do if there were leftovers? Oh, yes, what do you do with the leftovers? If there is. You're not supposed to have leftovers, but if there are, what do you do with them?
Did you burn them?
You burn them, right? You don't put it in the Tupperware, right? you burn it because it's holy. And so you get rid of anything that's left, right? This, by the way, is why the altar guild, if we have extra wine left over, or in the cups that we wash out, right? Because they do wash those cups out into a red bowl with a little mesh thing to get the cups out. And what do we do with the stuff in the bowl? That has a mix of water, soap, and the communion wine. Do you know what we do with it?
You pour it on the ground.
We open the door out and we pour it into the ground, right? It's returning to God that which he gave to us, right? And new altar guild people always kind of feel a little weird about that. And then we talk about Uzzah and the ark and that kind of thing. But I've also put the host out there as well. Let a bird take it or let it dissolve. I mean, that's what the earth is supposed to do, right? So while you might say, well, you don't burn holy things. Well, yeah, you do. You're giving it back to God. And so that sort of thing. So that's a long way to say that's what they're talking about with the meat. And you're holding it in the fold of your garment. Don't ask why. It's in your pocket for some reason, right? Apparently, many commentaries have tried to figure out what specific sacrifice this was. And they use weird grammar things. They're like, well, the priests get mentioned, but then it's just a person who has the meat. And this is the only sacrifice, a person who's not a priest. It's just holy meat, right? Like, I think you're doing too much weird work here, right? And why it's in your pocket, I have no idea, right? But you take your pocket and you touch it to, right? Bread, stew, wine, oil, or other food. Does it become holy, right? The answer is no. And so, okay. No, it does not, through a fold of clothing, make food holy, right? So, step one. Step two. If someone touches or becomes unclean by touching a dead body, which again, this is just Levitical stuff. This is one of the many ways to become ritually unclean, which meant you had to go through either a certain purification or you needed to wait a certain amount of time. This, by the way, is what Mary's doing in the temple with Jesus when... I have Nicodemus in my head. That's not who it is. Simeon shows up. She's purifying herself because one of the things that makes you ritually unclean is birthing a child. And according to the Levitical law, you wait X number of days, then you go and you offer a certain offering to the priest, and you are no longer ritually unclean. You're now purified. You're back to the mundane, if you will. So the question is, if someone who is ritually unclean, in this case by touching a dead body, touches food, does that food become ritually unclean? Yes. So, I think part of the delay there is it really kind of feels, in the light of Jesus, that the answer should be no, right? So, I mean, I'm with you. That's part of kind of what I got stuck on. And I think before Jesus, the answer was just flat no. Or yes, it does.
That was such a strong thing. Remember the whole Good Samaritan thing.
Right, and I think, so Jesus deals with this, and he also, right, he undoes a lot of this stuff through his death and resurrection, right? Rise, Peter, kill and eat, that sort of thing. And Jesus has no problem going up to dead people. And unclean, ritually unclean people. Like, Jesus is not worried about that. And so Jesus is dealing with it, I think, in his context, and also in the context of his work, which is, renewing life, and kind of bringing in this New Testament in his blood, right? So I think what we need to do here for a moment is kind of ignore that portion of Jesus' ministry, because I think it gets us off the mark here. It's like a red herring. Yes, obviously there's value there, but is the point Haggai is making about the particulars of the, I'm not going to say kosher laws, but kosher laws, right? The things that make you ritually unclean or ritually holy. No. This is a thought experiment, a metaphor, right? Which is what we get right at the end. So it is with this people. Okay. So, right? So it is with this people and with this nation before me, declares the Lord. And so with every work of the hands, what they offer there is unclean. So, without doing the Socratic thing here, partly because I got my notes on this one for reasons that I get, because I'm just working through this one too, right? What the commentator kind of pulls out here is he says, the meat, the holy meat, never actually touches anything other than the fold of the clothes. And so and he says this, so I'm assuming it's correct, while the fold of the clothes might be holy because of the presence of that holy meat, it cannot then transfer that holiness to something else. It's too many steps removed, right? The transitive property ends at one, if you will. And meanwhile, the unclean there's nothing in between that which is unclean and that which it touches, right? So it's a bigger transitive property, if you will. And so kind of the interpretation that he comes out with this, and he's backed up by some early church stuff too. And I think it's satisfying to me. And it also kind of fits with chapter 1 too, which is nice. Something has come in between the people and God. Right? God's the holy thing, right? Something is the fold in the garment. We don't know what that is, right? We talked about that last week when, we asked that question, why are the people not rebuilding the temple? They have a reason that they're not doing it, and God's not happy with that. I think it's the same thing going on here, right? And so because you still haven't gotten rid of whatever this worldly thing is, we'll just call it worldliness for the sake of broad reach, right? Which I think is intended. Because you haven't gotten rid of that, there's a barrier up, right? This is a law portion of the book of Haggai. This is not gospel. You get some gospel at the end, but God is chastising his people, saying this is a problem, and he's using the law first through blight and mildew, and now he's straight up telling them, right? Because that didn't get them to return to the Lord their God, right? Meanwhile, they have been in contact with unclean things, and there's no barrier there. So here's what I have here that I think really sums up my reading of this commentator's thoughts, and I think is where we need to go with this, right? So point 1, worldliness of some kind has come between them. This is one more thing. Remember in chapter 1 where God says, this people, not my people, right? I think that's coming back up here. They are still this people, right? Something has come in between this people, and let's read ourselves into that as well, right? And God, just as the fold in the garment stood between the holy meat and the food. There's something there, right? Fill in the blank in your own personal life. Similarly, there's no distinction between the people, this people, and here's what I really like, the dead world of sin, right? We're all dead in sin and our trespasses. I think that's kind of reading Paul into this a little bit, but I think it's fair, right? And so I think that might be why he uses a dead body specifically, right? You're indistinguishable from the dead world, and so you're unclean, right? And the reason I like kind of this way of looking at it is, one, it fits with chapter 1. It fits with some other biblical narrative stuff. And also the primary function of Israel as the priests of God, right? The ones who are God's people on earth. And the whole kosher laws and a lot of this stuff was to set them apart so that they are a different kind of people, right? And that they were identifiable as, hey, you're different. You are not like everyone else around you, which is why looking for a king becomes such a problem. The Israelites, throughout the era of the kings and the judges for that matter, become more and more like the nations, indistinguishable from them, right? And so God's kind of pointing this out. This is, right, kind of a very earthly way of putting it is, I can't tell the difference between you believers and those non-believers, right? And so they're dead, you're just as dead as they are. And I think in the modern context, I mean, I think this sort of problem is pretty big. I mean, in fact, I think, may I be so bold in the Wednesday night class, right? As to say, I think, and certainly in the American context, we have gone well past this as a problem. To the point where now many, not all, not Rivercliff, but in general, American Christians are not only they've gone past being indistinguishable from the unbelieving world, to the point where in many ways they are worse than the unbelieving world. You look at young people nowadays, and you look at what they're saying about Christianity, and it is, you get the sense of I'd rather be secular, because if I was Christian, I would be a worse person. I'd be more dead than the world around me. The world's got problems, but man, those Christians are even worse, right? That is a worse problem than what is being dealt with in Haggai. I think that's a problem, right? You know that song, they'll know we're Christians by our love? It's like, man, that one, that's not what the world is seeing right now. I mean, it's just not. Again, I do think Rivercliff is different. I know we strive to be different. I know we're also not perfect in that, right? None of us are. But I think Haggai is speaking to us here as well, right? And I think we need to start working on that, because I think it's one of the greatest challenges facing Christianity nowadays is the behavior of its people. And not in the sense of, oh, well, church is a hospital for sinners. Like, yeah, but you've been made alive. You are supposed to look different now. And like I said, I think Rivercliff is at least aware of that problem. But it's something for us to continue to be aware of. So, what should we do about it? What should those people do about it, right? There was the law portion. I gave you the modern version of it for our culture, right? We'll go to 18. Consider from this day onward, from the 24th day of the 9th month. That's the day he's saying this, right? Consider from this moment onward, since the day that the temple was made. 19. Is the seed yet in the barn? Indeed, the vine, the fig tree, the pomegranate, the olive tree had yielded nothing. But from this day on, I will bless you, right? And if we connect it in with verse 9, my house is a place of peace, right? So this is God's invitation almost, that return to the Lord your God, and I will bless you, right? And this is, we do need to be careful, right? That we don't turn into Joel Osteen here, right? We're not looking for an abundance of oil. No. That's not how any of this works, right? Who cares about the silver and the gold? That's not what this is about, right? This is about God blessing you, right? Gift of the Spirit, making you his alive and holy. It's a sanctification sort of thing, right? And blessings come with that, right? We recognize that. And when I say blessings come with that, I don't mean earthly blessings. Sometimes they do. Right? Sometimes they just don't. John the Baptist had basically no earthly blessings, right? He ate locusts, honey, and wore camel skins, and then a crazy king cut his head off for pointing out that he married his dead brother's wife. He was not blessed in the earthly sense. Yet, I think we would all agree that John was blessed from that eschatological standpoint. And so, God here is, while pointing out the major failing of his people, is basically saying, forget all that. We're starting over today, right? How many of you, I've done this a few times, right, with my kids, where things are just going bad. Everyone's having a meltdown. Everyone's angry and yelling at everyone, and I'm included in that, right? I know, you can probably not imagine anyone in my family yelling at each other, but we do. And I remember one day where I don't even know what we were doing. I had both the kids in the car with me. We were leaving. Warren was still at the house, and the kids weren't happy about it. I wasn't. No one was happy. We were all screaming and yelling at each other. And we get in the car, and I turned the car on, and I yelled at them to make them stop talking for a second, and I said, okay, we're starting over. So I don't care who's right, I don't care who's wrong, I don't care who wants what, right? Including me. We are hitting the reset button, and we're going to have a good day today. And that doesn't work all the time. But, I mean, that time, there was a shift, right? It was, and often these things happen. We weren't dealing with the stuff that was causing the problem. Okay, you can do that later, right? You know, God is not saying, well, now we need to go back and fix all of this. No, he says, from now on, we're just going to be good. It's going to be good, right? You're going to be my people, not this people. And we're going to go forward doing what we're supposed to be doing, right? And I'll bless you, right? I'm going to stop the punishment. That's over too, right? We're starting over, starting fresh. I think that's kind of the sense that we have here. And I think there's a tremendous hope there, right? And of course, this is what happens in baptism. This is what happens in confession and absolution, right? I mean, in that sense, though, there's even more because God does fix the problem, right? In the death and resurrection of Christ. It says, starting right now. And we have to hit that reset button a lot in this earthly life. But there's still that promise of eternal life that God has for us, right? All right, questions on this section before we hit the weird ending of the book? Because, this section wasn't weird enough. All right. Denise, are you willing to close us out here?
Sure. The word of the Lord came the second time to Haggai on the 24th day of the month. Speak to, how did you say his name?
Zerubbabel,
governor of Judah, saying, I am about to shake the heavens and the earth, and to overthrow the throne of kingdoms. I am about to destroy the strength of the kingdoms of the nations, and overthrow the chariots and their riders. And the horses and their riders shall go down, every one by the sword of his brother. On that day, declares the Lord of hosts, I will take you, or Zerubbabel, my servant, the son of,
Shealtiel,
declares the Lord, and make you like a signet ring, for I have chosen you, declares the Lord of hosts.
All right. You guys remember in Ezekiel, you're reading through all these condemnations of the kings, and you're like, okay, we're going through it, and you hit the condemnation against Tyre and Sidon, and all of a sudden stars are falling from heaven, and things get really weird. All of a sudden you're like, wait, hold on. What are we talking about? That's how I kind of feel about this end section. Haggai takes a real turn. Things change structurally, right? So first of all, the word of the Lord came a second time to Haggai when? On the same day as the last oracle. So we have two oracles on the same day. This is the only oracle that does not come by the hand of Haggai. It comes to Haggai. So Haggai is the initial recipient of this, right? Whereas with the other ones, the word of the Lord kind of came through the hand of Haggai, right? So the direction there shifts a little bit. And this is the only prophecy in the book of Haggai that is not directed to everyone. It is directed to Zerubbabel, and only Zerubbabel, right? And then we do get some tie-ins and connections, right? We get back to shaking things and that sort of thing. But the tenor of the book seems to shift away from the temple to this, I mean, if you're going to just take it at face value, which isn't the end of the world, right? To dealing with the governor specifically. Or it shifts from the temple to this weird eschatological, cosmic sort of commentary, which when I said most people, or there are people who try and figure out when the shaking happened in Zerubbabel's lifetime, that's because of this section, right? They say, oh, well, shaking, God's talking about the same event, and it happens during his life, so let's figure out what that is. So, God's about to do all these crazy and wild things. And what he directs this promise to Zerubbabel. What is the promise?
It's going to be a signet ring.
A signet ring.
He's going to be a signet ring. Right? For I have chosen you. right? So, we definitely have, especially with the chariots and the riders here, which you got, with the chariots and the riders, we're shifting into a day of the Lord image, right? This is recalling the Exodus and all sorts of things like that. So what is the signet ring all about?
Well, there was some other king that.
Oh.
What's the deal about that? Started with the J. Something about.
Did you have a note in your book, or you?
Yes.
Okay, I was gonna say because you're dead on correct, and I was total. I learned about this a few hours ago when I went through the comedy.
Yeah,
but still, yes, there's a reference in Jeremiah, a bad king. Jeremiah speaks to, and I have it written down, Jeconiah / Jehoiachin, same guy, two different names, just go with it, saying, you were my signet ring, and I cast you off because of his wicked acts. Who was Jeconiah / Jehoiachin? You guys remember? Because that would be impressive. He is the last Davidic king over Jerusalem, right? There's one that comes from an auxiliary line that becomes Zedekiah, or no, something like that. I don't know. He's got another name. But he's an auxiliary branch, and he's like a puppet for the Babylonians before the final wipeout. He's someone else as well. What I want you to do is I want you to turn to Matthew chapter 1. And you don't have to go very far, because we're pretty close to the end of the Old Testament here. So Matthew chapter 1, and let's start with, verse 11. Tell you what, I'll read it. So starting in verse 11, just to give us a little bit of a run-up. And Josiah, that's the good king Josiah, the father of Jeconiah. Okay, here he is. He's in the line of Jesus. We knew that already. Bad king in the line of Jesus. And his brothers at the time of the deportation to Babylon. After the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, and Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel is this guy's grandson, for one. So God says to the grandfather, you were my signet ring, and I'm casting you off. Exile. And now to his grandson, he says, I'm making you my signet ring. Restoration, right? But who else is Zerubbabel? Why is he in the beginning of Matthew? This is the genealogy of Jesus. Jesus is a direct descendant of Zerubbabel. So one of the things you can do whenever you have someone who's a direct ancestor of Jesus, especially if you get into a weird place, and I can give you the Hebrew mind's reasoning for this after I turn the camera off. Because I know lots of middle schoolers watch this and it gets a little salacious. But you can, with some confidence, import Jesus into that place. And so, right, we do this with David all the time, right? One of the key places we do it, since we're thinking temple here, is when the promise is given to David, right? Will you build me a house? I'll build you a house, and your son will sit on the throne of that house forever. And we go, is that Solomon? No, it's not Solomon, but it's Jesus, right? And so, okay, cool. Well, look at this. If we're looking day of the Lord, well, let's import and just swap the names here for a second, right? I'm about to shake the heavens and the earth and to overthrow the kingdoms. I'm about to destroy the strength of kingdoms and nations and overthrow the chariots and their riders, and the horses and their riders shall go down, every one by the sword of his brother. On that day, declares the Lord of hosts, I will take you, O Christ, my servant, the son of the Father, in this case, we're changing stuff up, declares the Lord, and make you like a signet ring, for I've chosen you, declares the Lord of hosts. And again, remember, we're not only near the end of the Old Testament, but we're near the end of the Old Testament historically, too. These are some of the last words that God gives to his people. And it is, in my mind, reminding us of the Davidic promise of the Savior. It is also why I think we don't need to worry about when the shaking happened during Zerubbabel's lifetime, because I think Zerubbabel here is more or less a placeholder for the Messiah, for Christ, for his son, Jesus, right? Just like Solomon's a placeholder for Jesus in that prophecy, Zerubbabel here is a placeholder for Jesus. And this kind of fits, right? We just had the baptism of Jesus, right? I'll make you like a signet ring, for I have chosen you. This is my beloved son, in him I am well pleased, right? Out of Egypt I have called my son, right? My chosen one, in whom I delight. This language fits this relationship, according to the economic Trinity, that the Father and the Son have with one another during his mission. It's how Jesus talks about how he is connected with the Father when he's talking about, right, his work on earth and the things he's doing, right? Obviously, we're not undoing all the co-equal, co-eternal stuff, but that's a different locus, if you will. Here we're talking about the work of the Son. And this really seems to fit if we understand it not as Zerubbabel himself, although what is the message to Zerubbabel? You're still my chosen one, right? Yeah, your grandfather screwed up really bad, but I have redeemed you. I've brought you back, and you're still my chosen person, right? And he's the ruler right now. Let's not completely rip this out of its historical context, but as we have with most of Haggai at this point, let's also remember that Haggai was written, yes, for a people in a very specific time, but also for all people of all time. And so as we start to look at Haggai from the lens of the New Testament, which is totally a fair thing to do, and maybe not if you're Jewish, they would probably disagree with that, but that's how we understand the Old Testament, right? So if we do that, then we can start to see, this is some greater, more eternal fulfillment of what's going on here. And now, all of a sudden, look at this, we haven't actually changed topics. Like it might seem at first blush. When we're talking about rebuilding a temple, and, the people haven't been blessed because they are in their building of the temple because of their uncleanliness, but God's willing to redeem them. And now all of a sudden we're talking about some king when God smashes some nations up. What? Well, again, great that we're doing this right after Advent. I didn't plan this at all. That was not sarcastic. I really did not plan this. It just works well. Who is Jesus? Can we not, every time the temple gets referenced here, especially in the Eschatology, right? I'll fill my temple with glory. Well, that's Jesus' incarnation, right? That's a totally fair way to understand that. And then, of course, what is the church? We're referred to as the body of Christ. Right. And so we see that, yes, some of the references have kind of changed, but the overall subject is still the same. It's still a Christological view of Christ showing up in the Old Testament prophet here. Maintaining, right, we've said this a lot, the overall narrative of the Old Testament especially, right? God redeeming his people, but the thread of the whole scriptural narrative there. This is God coming with law and gospel. This is Jesus being the one to redeem his people, right? And create this new temple that is more glorious than the old temple because it's the real one, right? And this kind of pushes us into Hebrews, which, by the way, it's the book of Hebrews that quotes Haggai. Pushes us into Revelation image, right? The temple of God now is dwelling with man, coming out of heaven, right? All of this kind of starts to fit together and it stops being so kind of weird, which, it's a weird book, right? Especially if you don't look at it in these ways. But you can really start to see, here's a cohesive line of thought that runs not only through Haggai, but runs through the whole narrative structure of the Old Testament, right? Because now and again, this happens in these latter prophets that come right at the end. We really see linkages from the Old Testament into the New, right? And, I've chosen you, declares the Lord of hosts. That's really Christological, right? I'm over here getting ahead of myself, looking to the end of Malachi. I'm going to do it anyway, and then we'll kind of close. Just a little. Yeah, well, yeah. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes, and he'll turn the hearts of fathers to their children, and the hearts of children to fathers, lest I come and strike the land with a decree of utter destruction. Now, the last word of the Old Testament is destruction, but there's hope, and the hope comes in Jesus. But we'll get to that right before we go into the hope that is Ash Wednesday. No, you are good. It's time anyway. So, questions? Well, I'm going to delay you while we say the Lord's Prayer. So you can tell them that it was my fault that I prayed and you had to stick around. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. All right.